Hi everyone, Garth here from the Psych Sessions podcast. Now before I get you to this conversation about teaching and stuff, I want to share something with you. Years ago, the Psych Sessions podcast became a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And now, for the first time, we're asking if you would consider supporting Psych Sessions by making a tax-deductible donation. You see, in the early years, we started with a grant, and that was great. But as we grew, so did our expenses. I even remember at one point my podcast partner putting his own money into this thing to make it run. And if you know him well, that won't surprise you. We are continually grateful for the support we have from sponsors and partners, but we thought, why shouldn't we reach out to the people who are listening to Psych Sessions week by week and invite them to support us? So, please consider making a tax-deductible donation by the end of the year or plan for it for next year. If you want to do a monthly donation of a small amount, we would welcome that using the link bit.ly/Psych Sessions-donate. That is bit.ly/ that's a capital P, Psych, capital S, Sessions, all one word, dash, lowercase donate. You can also find that link in our liner notes, and thank you so much for your support.
Hello, and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Eric Landrum, along with Garth Neufeld, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 133, where Garth had the opportunity to interview members of the American Psychological Association's Introductory Psychology Initiative, that's IPI, Student Learning Outcomes and Assessment Group, comprised of Jennifer Thompson, Kristin Whitlock, Jane Halonen, Sue Frantz, and yours truly, Eric Landrum. Before you hear this interview, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. Now, this might be a bit unusual for a couple of reasons. That is, this intro might be unusual. First off, I am introducing something that I was a part of as a group member. Secondly, I was late to this interview, so how rude of me. I also want to point out that Sue Frantz was unable to be part of this interview, so we definitely want to give her credit for the work, but you're not going to hear her very important voice. So I wanted to mention that. So just a couple of things I think worth noting that you might want to listen for, and maybe just a couple of my very brief recollections. I think the group interview will speak volumes. You know, when you're in the midst of a project like this, I think you become in a bubble and you might not realize the impact that it has, the potential it might have until after the fact. And I think this interview and some of the reflections that we've had as a group after the fact kind of give us the notion of this could really be something that is influential. And I think you heard that from Jen and from Kristin and Jane as they reflected during this interview. The weight of the approval of APA is meaningful, and we talk about that during this interview. You know, as a group, I mean, those are really 5 strong personalities, if you know any of us or all of us. And so the ability to have that trust and be able to disagree internally, you know, different people participate in these national initiatives for different reasons. And if you're at a certain point in your career, and again, part of that is the luxury, part of that is privilege, part of that is the time to participate, and all kinds of things come together. But for me, I can say it's that ability to have conversations that are really deep with other national leaders on these topics is really rewarding. Those disagreements and debates about what's important and what should be on the national agenda and the national radar. That's probably more important to me personally, that edification, than hey, we developed some assessment recommendations, even though that's an important idea for me. I probably got more out of, those conversations. If you step back though and think about the work, as I think Jen and Jane and Kristin do articulate quite well, start thinking about the number of people that these guidelines, these outcomes, recommendations, the number of students they can impact, how the pipeline is impacted. I also think someone made the comment here, if you really read these carefully, for some folks, for some instructors, it will give them the permission to stop worrying about covering all of the content. These student learning outcomes are also content agnostic. They can use with any textbook. If you're not using a textbook, if you're using OER, these will apply. Just as a little aside, it was really fun to see what people would say, when you're late to something, and to see what they'll say about predicting. What would Eric say? And Jen, you're exactly right. I would talk about skills. That tends to be in my wheelhouse. I loved what Kristin said about what the revolutionary upgrade here is. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you what she said. I'll let you listen for that. I still stand by my statement that I made during this interview that whether Jane Halonen is and David Stromitz, that means you have to drink. I think that's a double drink if you are mentioned during the podcast about the drinking game that you invented for the podcast, by the way. I think when Jane Halonen is named to any committee or organization, whether she's named the leader or not, she is a leader of that team. Just the national knowledge that she brings of the teaching of psychology just by default makes her that. Anyway, a couple other things worth noting. I think the themes are really important. I think the themes are going to be something that people take away when they read the outcomes, when they read the book that was edited by Regan Gorung and Garth Neufeld. I think the themes are greatly inspired and really kind of brought to life by Bridget Martin Hard. I also see some of that original inspiration by Wayne Whiten and his 7 themes that he came up with. And so I kind of give dual credit, and I'm sure there are other people in our discipline who've done that as well. Within our own group, we had some of our favorite themes, although like children, it's really hard to kind of favor one over the other. Anyway, I really hope that you enjoy this kind of sneak peek behind the curtain of somewhat of how all of this was made and how the group collaborated on the behalf of introductory psychology instructors everywhere. Enjoy.
Well, I am here with quite the crew of colleagues. And so let me just start here with Jennifer Thompson and Kristin Whitlock and Jane Halonen. Thank you for joining me for this, as Eric would say, extra special Psych Sessions episode.
Aren't they all?
Yeah, aren't they all? Yeah. So this is really special to us because we have been at this work with the Introductory Psychology Initiative for and I would say it's not even finished yet, but a significant portion for you all just finished maybe 2 weeks ago, week and a half, 2 weeks ago. But for years, 4 years, you have been doing this. And so, wow, let's just, maybe I'll just throw it over to Jen. Would you mind kicking us off and just telling us, what was the big news recently? And then we can go wherever we want from there.
The biggest news that literally almost brought me to tears was that APA Council approved the student learning outcomes, the IPI student learning outcomes as official policy for APA. So that was huge and represented a fantastic culmination of, as you pointed out, Garth, years and 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 years of really hard work. And I can honestly say it's probably the feather in my cap professionally. Right now, it's the thing I'm most proud of. It was a wonderful opportunity to be involved with great people. And I'm just so happy that APA was able to recognize the importance and significance of what we had done.
Yeah, Kristin, you come out of this like hybrid world of like so long in high school, and then you've now also taught in college. And so you have these two perspectives. When you think about putting through these outcomes as policy and all the work that you all did to that end, like, what are your thoughts about it? Just to put you on the spot.
Well, I'm thrilled, absolutely thrilled, obviously, because, just for the sense of, the backing of the APA, just that there's some legitimacy there, because it's sometimes hard to convince instructors that this is a good idea unless there's a little bit of weight behind it. I don't know how else to say that, but I think that just having the support of the APA just kind of lends just some, respectability or just maybe some press. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think that teachers who are trying to decide, is this a good thing? Should I do this? To be able to have that weight behind it, I think kind of just helps maybe move them toward, that this is something I need to consider and think about doing. High school is different than, I don't know. I mean, we have a hard enough time just trying to get everybody to know about the TOPS national standards, right? And so just to have this kind of at the pinnacle, and then the new national standards coming out that incorporate this, as well as now the advanced placement group bringing in the IPI standards into the new curriculum that's going to be coming out. I mean, I just think it's fantastic because it's kind of this blending of all of these different areas into one. So I think it's immensely exciting. For the high school. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think for the work you all did, and there was other people involved as well. Eric Landrum, Sue Frantz was involved in the work as well. And for the work you did, it's an endorsement from APA of saying, and I mean, you guys can talk about the process a little bit because it's intense, but there's an endorsement, literally an endorsement that says we're behind this. Jane, what are your thoughts just off the bat about this? Have you gone through one of these policy things before? Because you've worked a little bit with APA.
Yeah, I've had a dance or two with APA politics, and this process was similar to past situations where you take really good work and you submit it for review, and then you have to respond to reviewers, and you have to work with co-chairs, and sometimes there's internal strife trying to figure out which point of view prevails. And so I have to say it's a contentious and yet a collaborative process. The woolly mammoths, as we called ourselves through this process, got along really well, enough that it sustained being able to disagree about important things. And so ultimately, I think we were able to craft a document that was approval worthy from APA. But just to follow up what Kristin said, everybody knew that it was approval worthy, and that's why AP showed interest, and that's why the people working on the revision of national high school standards said, well, this is good. Let's go this way. So it's almost like APA had to approve it, given that course was definitely out of that barn.
So history of assessment work, coming up with outcomes for the undergraduate psychology major, where has intro psych fit into this conversation historically? Like, what had been done on outcomes or talked about over the years? And Jane, I'll put that back to you.
Psych Sessions is sponsored by Macmillan Learning. Coming in 2022, Macmillan Learning's Achieve for Psychology sets a whole new standard for integrating assessments, activities, and analytics into your teaching. Among many innovations in Achieve, you'll find Macmillan's new instructor activity guides, the easy way to make active learning a part of your teaching, whether it's face-to-face or remote. Chapter by chapter, these instructor activity guides provide a roadmap for getting students involved in an immersive classroom activity, offering a structured plan and bringing together all the resources you'll need. See for yourself and tell us what you think. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions for a special preview. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning.
what had been done on outcomes or talked about over the years? And Jane, I'll put that back to you.
I think probably the closest that I can say APA's commitment, this is kind of ironic, maybe it's paradoxical even, that the very first venture that APA had from the Board of Educational Affairs into assessment and outcomes was at the high school level with the development of high school standards. While we didn't necessarily speak in outcomes language, we certainly produced curriculum structures that set a tone for what standards should be. But thereafter, it was sort of like the TOPS group managed to take those standards and run with it, and they've continuously revised, as of course APA policy requires every 10 years. You have to revisit to make sure that whatever the protocol is still valid. So after the high school standards took off, then APA's attention turned to other levels, 2-year level, 4-year level, master's level, clinical levels. And in that process, intro fell to the wayside until the IPI initiative.
Yeah. Why is it important? Anybody can field this, but why is it important that intro have these endorsed outcomes? Like, what impact does this have? And you can just, whoever wants to go.
I was going to say, I think it impacts the number of students, just the sheer number, 1.5 million students a year that take intro. Think about the number of students that you are impacting just by looking at one class. I think that, like many other survey courses, it can feel untenable because it feels like there's a lot of content you have to cover. And I don't prefer that word, but that's sort of what it feels like. You know, you have 16 chapters of a textbook. We have to get all this stuff in. We have to talk about the action potential. We have to talk about all these other things. And it's also, at least for a lot of places, the class that newer faculty teach, whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing. It's often the thing that graduate students teach, that new faculty teach, and there's very little guidance out there on how to teach it, what to teach, what's important, what do we want students to know. And so I think having national level standards for student outcomes, national level ideas for how to design the class, national level ideas for how to train your teachers, all of these things that came out of the IPI for the first time, I can't imagine having a greater impact on one single population of students in a class.
Yeah. So sheer number of students. Kristin, what do you want to add to that? Why is it important that we have this kind of these shared outcomes?
Well, I'm thinking about the pipeline, right? Because I'm thinking about from high school, moving students toward, the community college or, university level courses, that there's some consistency. There's some, we're kind of looking at the same ideas. So like if I'm teaching these themes in high school, they move on to a gen ed, they move on to intro psych and take it in the college level, that they're going to see similar things. So I'm kind of thinking about kind of along that pipeline as well. So, and I also think too, just for, even at the high school level, if I'm thinking about what's being taught like in AP psychology versus what's being taught in an intro psych class at the college level, that there's that consistency there as well. That, because sometimes, we've talked about how wildly different intro psych classes can be. This just provides just a little bit more structure and some answers for instructors about what to teach and how to approach the course.
And I would add, it's permission to stop worrying about covering the content.
Yeah.
That it liberates faculty, and especially important, as Jen pointed out, the numbers of people assigned to teach intro class. The hardest class I think there is to teach, we give it to the rank beginners usually. Not a good design. This at least encourages people to see what is most important, regardless of context. These are the kinds of things that you should be paying attention to. So you don't necessarily have to teach Axon stuff if you don't think that is going to support the best use of your time and the particular class that you're teaching.
Now, let's talk about this, because I think that the way that new teachers like I was, when I taught introductory psychology, the way that it happens is that you get a textbook or maybe not, but you find a textbook and then you are led to believe, as you reflect back on your own intro psych experience as a student, you were led to believe that it's all about this content, and the chapters of the textbooks are set up in such a way that you just move through this content, chapter 1 through 16. So it's a very, very content driven as it's kind of on its face. And you all did something that's pretty interesting. The term you use is content agnostic, and maybe. Yeah, and Jane, you were just talking about this some more, but I want to dive into it. Let's get in the weeds a little bit about what it means to determine outcomes that are content agnostic, and why that is such, I would say, that's just so out of the box for how to teach intro psych.
I'm not sure it's completely out of the box. And I'm going to harken back to the original guidelines that were published for the standards for high school psychology, that one of the models that group developed, I was a consultant to that group. When was that, Kristin? 90 years ago? That we had determined there are concentrations of things that you need to touch on with research and methods at the core of everything we do. And that model, I think, predated what is now widely recognized as the pillar model from work done on strengthening the core. The idea, I think, means there isn't a specific content concept that must be in intro. But as you look at the spread of what psychology represents, you need to be able to sample so that when students emerge from the class, they understand what it means to think and solve problems like a psychologist. And you can get up to that mountaintop with a whole lot of different pathways. And that's why we decided every time people would ask us, when are you going to specify what the content is? We would say, that's not what this is about. This is about how do you concentrate on the skill of helping students become good psychological thinkers, content agnosticism.
I think there's also some recognition that skills are what is enduring. And there's been many studies, and if Eric were here, he could tell you all about them, that show that, the content or the topics in psychology or any class really are not what lasts. It's the skills. And as Jane said, the thinking like a psychologist, the starting that approach to thinking critically to help solve problems. And how do you look at that? Those are the kinds of things that last years and years later. And that's the sort of transformation that we want to see in our intro students.
Looking for more affordable quality materials for your intro psych students? Check out Hawks Learning's mastery-based courseware and texts. These materials introduce foundational psychology and research concepts that inspire students of all majors to think more critically about the world around them. Take advantage of the software features designed with student learning in mind, like customizable lessons that allow you to add videos, Google Slides, forms, and more to illustrate concepts and deepen understanding. Explore these materials, available to students for as low as $43, alongside free chapter projects and example videos at www.hawkslearning.com/psych sessions. Again, that's www.hawkslearning.com/psych sessions. Jane, I do think it's quite out of the box. I don't think it's quite out of the box for the way you're talking for the folks who have been in this work and doing it. I think that it's kind of the natural progression of things. And thank goodness APA finally endorsed it so that we can, push it out with some authority, right? But for the regular instructor out there who was not trained, like I wasn't trained, this didn't occur to me. And so I do think it is for many people out there, and the metaphor I'm using these days is drowning in intro psych. For those who are drowning in intro psych, I just, I'll put myself out there. I was bad. I was a bad instructor, because I just jammed as much content as I could down my students' throats and give them multiple choice tests, because that is naturally what it looks like they should be doing when you get those. Now the instructor resources have gotten better, but when you get that 16 chapter textbook, even the brief one, and you get those instructor resources, that is the kind of what occurs. So anyway, those are a few thoughts.
I think that's a fair observation. I think especially if faculty are being unmentored in the process, it's easy to get swept up in, here's your book, here's your test, here's the test bank, go. And that does encourage really focusing on the content. But I think the standard for a lot of teachers is recognizing that, as Jen says, content is transitional. It's likely to disappear on you if you don't use it. And so what you want to focus on would be things that will endure. And that's why making sure that people are paying attention and grooming skills that reflect psychology, whether students are going to go on into the major or whether this is their very last class. That's one part of our conscientious decision. We know this is our last class to make an impression about what psychologists do, that we want to make sure that it has a long-lasting positive impact.
Yeah.
I think the most revolutionary. I mean, part of these outcomes is really the inclusion of the themes. I mean, I think each of the outcomes are important. Just as Jen and Jane were saying, in terms of learning to think like a psychologist, thinking like a scientist. But I think probably the most revolutionary part is to get people thinking about integrating themes into the way they're approaching what they choose to teach and what content they select. I think that's probably the most exciting part is to try to think about how to do that.
Yeah. Well, I did want to ask you about the themes. In fact, I do want to get into these a little bit. And so let's start here. This is, we can, one of the things that we're doing is we're calling back to decades of conversations related to intro psych. So it's not like it started, I mean, I applaud your group definitely, but what we're hearing is that these conversations have been ongoing and really culminated in this work. So, kudos to all those who've been involved before. And even themes are not probably a new recommendation, but you guys came up with some really interesting themes. And I wonder, let me just ask, pull back the curtain. What was that like?
It was all fun and games and sunshine the whole time. We did everything. It was the easiest thing ever.
Well, you know what? I have a mystery guest who may want to chime in on this. And actually, we all knew he was coming late, so here he comes, and we're not editing anything. So,
is there a drum roll or anything going on?
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen,
there should be.
Ladies and gentlemen,
who's there?
No.
Eric Landrum. You have come in the middle of the episode, Eric, and welcome.
Hi, Eric.
Hi. I'm sorry. In my brain, I had it at 4:00 my time. So I'm actually 5 minutes early. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Well, thanks for being so early. This is fun. So the question, Eric, just to throw you right to the
let's have him answer that question.
Yeah, right.
Was what was it like?
Absolutely, yes. I'm sorry.
What was it like in the room with the four of you to really battle out these themes, it's particularly the integrative themes, because people had differences of opinion on outcomes. And so we just wanted to get a look behind the curtain, and nobody's really shared about it yet.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I'll actually do it seriously. And then my friends and colleagues can correct the record, because I've actually thought about this the last couple of days. Jane's already cracking up. Jennifer and Kristin are bracing themselves for what the hell am I going to say? This was a challenge. You're thinking about these big issues on an important topic of student learning objectives. You're thinking about it from a national perspective. So you can't think about it for your own school or your own state. So it's a big, huge, hairy problem that you're thinking about. And then here's on a local level, I think I owe Jen and Kristin a thanks and an apology, because thank you for all the leadership that you provided, and at least an apology on my part, because what the frack was anybody thinking saddling you with Jane Halonen, Sue Frantz, and Eric Landrum as your team?
Can I tell you a secret? Kristin and I fought for you all.
Well,
as soon as we were told we could have a dream team, we knew exactly who we wanted, and there was some arguing over personnel, and we got what we wanted.
Well, maybe you got what you deserve, but you certainly didn't get what you wanted, because your dream team definition dictionary is wrong. because here's the thing, and I kind of mean this seriously. Whether she's the leader or not, Jane Halonen's the leader of the team. Jane Halonen has 40 years of experience and knowledge about anything that any of us have ever known or know about pedagogy in higher ed. So if I'm in a group with her, whether or not she's the leader or not, she's the knowledge leader. She may not be the functional organizational leader. She's the motivational leader and the inspirational leader. So she can be a member, and for our listeners, I'm using air quotes, but she's the leader. So I think Kristin and Jen, and I won't put words in your mouth, but even if there might have been times where you disagreed, I can't imagine that you were going to come out and say, "Hi, Jane Halonen, award-winning, internationally known psychologist. You're WRONG wrong," because there were times that I slightly disagreed, and I said, "I think it might be something different than that." And I just got slapped silly by the four of you, and I learned to stop doing that because I probably was wrong. So I have a thank you and an apology. It had to be a difficult group to navigate. We pushed back on a lot of things that made you talk to, what was his name? Reagan, Rogan.
Oh, that guy.
That guy and Garth. And then they pushed back on APA. So it had to be a difficult leadership challenge. And talk about cat herding in the best and worst possible way. So anyway, that's my insider perspective, Garth. In a
Eric Landrum,
way.
out of the gates, hot, folks.
There we go.
Can I follow that up if you don't mind? A friend and colleague of mine, Dave Stromet, says that when he listens to podcasts, he's now turned the mention of Jane Halonen into a drinking game. Mm-hmm. So he would be entirely drunk now based on your tirade, Eric. So thanks a lot.
I hesitate to argue because you're kind of making my point. Why would I argue with a national treasure?
All right. So to get the attention off Jane Halonen, let me say a few things, which
Take a drink.
A paradox. Yes, this group was a loving but contentious group. We did have lots of disagreements, but I think we were able, for the most part, to rise above whatever the personal issues were, to keep in mind what's going to be in the best interest, what's going to be in the common good. And so ultimately, I think we were able to manage that. But I am going to reinforce what Eric said, that when I saw the configuration of the team, and as much as I love Jen and Kristin, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be interesting.
And I think good debate leads to good outcomes. I think it's okay to have good, hard discussion because ultimately we're going for the same goal. I mean, we all wanted to come up with the best student learning outcomes we could. And I think we had to have the hard conversations to make it the best we could. So I think it all came out for the good.
And I think as much as Jane Halonen, I'm going to say it again just for Dave, is first of all, she's almost not wrong a whole lot. So it does make it, she's very good at not leading the group. She's very good at leading the group because she allows for other people to express their ideas. She gives constructive feedback. But what I was going to say is that I felt like, yes, our group had challenges because it's full of a bunch of strong personalities, strong intelligence, strong ideas. But when Kristin and I sat down for all of the 30 seconds it took us to come up with who we wanted, I mean, literally, it was very quick because it was Jane is the assessment guru. Eric is skills and all the work that he's done with intro already. And they're both, master teachers. And Sue brings us community college experience and national landscape experience at the community college level that we really wanted to bring into the group as well. And so I think that we were looking at it from different spokes on a wheel, right? So we're all going the same place, but we all need to have strong spokes coming from different areas. So yeah, it wasn't always easy to hold it together, but we did it. The wagon has moved.
I
forward.
think some of that is personality for sure. And then some of it is just the nature of how different your little group was compared to the other three groups. I think that there may be less fighting in the, what does transformation look like in a student's life? Like you're not trying to like take these huge ideas and simmer them down into like a deliverable, like a few sentences. And that brings a whole lot to your group, the challenge that your group faced together. And so, I'm guessing that, and maybe we can just talk about this for a second. I'm guessing that you had to give up some things at some point for the group, for the goals that you wanted to deliver. And does anybody have anything that they now we're not trying to go backwards here, but any moment where they,
why are you opening this box?
Because it's good. It's good to look.
We did have the additional burden that we were informed right out of the gate that the other three groups would be depending on what we came up with. And that's one of the reasons why we met early, we met long, we wrote double. We knew that this, while it might not be the backbone of what was going on, we knew that this was essential to being able to develop the initiative. So we took that pretty seriously.
Our work got vetted by other APA entities. I don't know if the other three groups had their work vetted by other APA entities.
Well, let's just think about what happened during the course of IPI globally, right? Me Too happened. George Floyd happened. There was a lot of things a lot of demands placed on your group culturally that you had to rise to and figure out not only how are we going to deal with this, but how are these outside organizations or people who are commenting on these things, how are they going to respond to those things? And, I don't know if you've all just taken a moment to reflect on the fact that you did all this while the world was, and we had somebody as our president, which was kind of making all these things more complicated. So, yeah.
Well, can we go back to your original question, which was, what did we give up? Because I remember losing an argument, guru that I am, I lost an argument. And in the long run, I can imagine that I should have lost the argument. And that is trying to see if we should import the structure of Guidelines 2.0 as the structure for APA IPI. And I really thought that there would be real value in trying to reflect that structure, since that has successfully characterized the pipeline. It turns out, I think that we made the right decision not to do that, because the introductory course is not a psychology major course. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily have to cohere. And I think that then made it relatively easy as we move into Guidelines 3.0 revision, which several of us on this conversation have a stake in at this point, to be able to say, you know what? We're not talking about intro, because intro is a minor piece in the psych major, but intro is a major piece when we're thinking about the impact of that course on the regular consumer. So the fact that we ended up saying it's about content, it's about research and data skills, and it's about themes really allows for that narrowing of focus and the liberation that I spoke of earlier.
I think it actually broadens the course a little bit. And Jane, of course, I knew that's what you were going to say in terms of arguments lost. I was actually out of the room for the 10 minutes that decision was made. So I came back and I had expected it to look like goal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like the Guidelines 2.0. And so I came back and I was like, well, okay, well, this isn't that. I was attending a BEA meeting. It was important, but
that's right.
I don't want people to think I was just out of the room, but I literally came back and it was different than what I expected. But I do think that the addition of the themes, and Kristin always speaks so eloquently about them, but broadens what we're able to do with the course, rather than just having goal 3 of social responsibility, ethical and social responsibility in a diverse world. I think that our goal about psychology, valuing diversity and promoting equity is so much bigger than sort of one little indicator in that goal would have been that we'd be able to address within one course. And so I think the theme really opens it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we made the right decision, but I wasn't happy about it at the time.
So what? You're 499 for 500? That's a pretty good batting average, Dr. Halonen.
Thank you.
So the themes are the thing that, and somebody talked about it already, but the themes are the thing that are going to be a little different. Now, I know you all do not want the outcomes lost in the themes because the whole thing is the outcomes, right? So if folks want to get a look at this, apa.org/IPI, you can find a PDF of those outcomes. But Jane, you just nicely kind of summarized them as being like a content outcome. What was the second one? What is it called?
Scientific orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. And then we've got the themes. Let's just go. We're not going to go through these kind of item by item, but maybe the outcomes, those 3 outcomes in general. Can we just talk through those a little bit and talk about introductory psychology content first, which is here's the big theme: psychology content, identify basic concepts and research findings. Let's just comment on that, and we'll go through all 3 that way. Who's up?
Well, I think we all realize that content's important, that we don't want to say that. I mean, we said that's content agnostic, but still, in order to understand these themes or be able to do anything else, you've got to have a basic understanding of the discipline of psychology in order to be able to apply them and use them in other ways. So I think content that's one of the reasons why we still have that as an outcome. But when you look at the other indicators, that are there, it goes beyond just defining and explaining the basic concepts. That's one of them. But helping, looking at interpreting research findings and applying principles to your own personal growth and other aspects of your life. I mean, it's asking students to go beyond just memorizing concepts, but actually being able to use them, and see how they apply to their own life in really important ways.
Yeah. So this is the big content piece. What Kristin was just talking about might not be new, or it might be a take on it, but it's pretty straightforward. I think what we've already talked about in this hour was that the thinking like a scientist piece is a big gift that we give to students in intro psych. And so this is the second outcome: scientific thinking, solve problems using psychological methods. Now, there's a lot of ways that you could have said it, but you decided to say solve problems. Anybody want to comment on scientific thinking and solving problems using psychological methods?
Yeah, students should be taught how to do that in intro psych.
Can you unpack it a little?
Yeah, I think to the extent that you can, whether you're teaching in a term, a quarter, or a semester, you start to help students understand how to think like a psychological scientist. So you start to think about, skepticism. You start to think about how we need the accumulation of evidence, how we start to think about how we don't ever prove anything. We only disprove, false or incorrect hypotheses. Students can wrap their head around, in a jury in the US, it's either guilty or not guilty. They can wrap their head around that. Juries don't declare someone innocent in the US. Well, if they can get that about jurisprudence, we can help them transfer that to psychological science and the accumulation of evidence. So they're not going to fully understand it, but if they can start to understand the standards of evidence, I think Susan Nolan makes this case really well. It's more important now than ever about fake news and how do we draw conclusions. And we draw conclusions that are evidence informed. And so it's not going to be perfect after every intro psych class, but that's what it means to me, at least.
Well, and I want to add too, from a high school perspective, this is really important for us to have this piece in here because, psychology is typically found in the social studies departments, not in the science department. And so if teachers want to make the case to their, local departments of education and get that as a science credit, there needs to be some documentation out there that you are teaching the skills of science and scientific thinking. So I think this is another place that teachers can point to and say, see, this this is what we expect students to be able to do after they've taken an introductory psychology class. So I think it's really important that way as well.
I really see the one that you pointed out, Garth, the solve problems. For me, this is the aspirational part of this document, or one indication of the aspirational part. I feel pretty strongly that goals, whether it's program goals, course goals, whatever, have to have a little bit of, in an ideal world, sort of idea. So we want to move toward helping students to know, as Eric said, to know how to maybe approach a problem or to solve a problem. But stating it in the way we did, right? We could have said it many different ways, as you pointed out, but saying solve problems. We want the students to understand that they're going to be able to come out of the course with the skills to know how to approach and be able to do that. And I think that is a really powerful statement for them to know that that's what they're going to learn in the class.
A little process comment here. I wasn't surprised that Eric spoke so eloquently about skills, because I think skills are most relevant to the second outcome here. And these are the skills that we want students to have leaving our course. And Kristin, to your point, I think I was just in a conversation this afternoon, the most recent conversation about psychological science and psychology, and how do we represent ourselves to the world and to higher education, to our colleagues outside of our discipline. It is really important. I don't want to glance over this as, well, this has been around for a while in psychology, this second outcome. It's important. It means something. We need our students to be able to articulate this, even coming out of intro, that they are solving problems, not just with intuition or common sense, but with scientific thinking. And so, I just don't want to, as we get into themes, particularly, which is where we'll spend kind of the rest of our time, I think, I don't want to minimize those first two outcomes. Anything else on those first two outcomes?
Well, I'm just going to say, I don't think that we've won the battle yet of the general public seeing psychology as science, right? I don't think we've won that battle yet. I don't know if you've won it in your universities, but we definitely haven't won it on the ground level here at the high school level, and if we can help our students understand this important piece of this discipline, I think that's a major victory, because they're going to go on. Maybe they'll never take another psychology class, but hopefully they'll have that enduring understanding that this is a science course, and they become the problem solvers and the decision makers and policy makers of the future. So hopefully they will be able to help change some of our cultural understandings of what psychology is and the potential it has to help us solve these vexing problems that are facing us today in our world. So,
yeah,
Jane,
Kristin,
I'd love.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Kristin, we haven't solved a lot of problems facing us.
Yeah.
We haven't solved the problem of parents of psychology majors questioning their sons and daughters about, you can't do anything with a psychology degree.
Right.
Or legislators, as Jane well knows, or, just other adults who don't understand higher education. And that's kind of on us as educators. We haven't done our job educating our colleagues, our friends, our neighbors. And this is something that Sue Frantz, the missing link here today, was really good about talking about, can we explain these concepts in intro psych the way we would explain them to our neighbor and make them relevant? And she was always good about bringing us back to that. I know sometimes I might get wrapped up into what I want my college students to know, and Sue would oftentimes bring us back to, Eric, I don't need my community college students to know that. And so I think that was one of our real challenges as a group, to make sure that those outcomes and those themes could, for the most part, go across high school, community college, and university students and be applicable to almost everybody, no matter where you are.
Yeah, no doubt. Jane, do you want to comment at all on skills, or do you think we've covered it here in these first two outcomes?
I'm just going to say that the comments so far have been eloquent, and I don't want to tarnish them. So I'd say let's move on.
Let's do it. Let's go to these themes. There are 7 themes. They're called integrative, because you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because they integrate multiple pieces of content across different areas of psychology, or they can. So these are, let me ask you, what are these 7 integrative themes? Not particularly what are they each, but
Like, what is the spirit behind them would be the question.
I think we were told to do them.
By Jen and Kristin, right?
No, I think she told them to do them.
Oh, I'm not remembering that part.
I actually think we were a little bit inspired. Bridget Martin Hard gave a talk at APA.
Exactly.
Just before IPI kicked off. And she talked about how she uses thematic elements in teaching Psych 100. And she does it in sort of an interesting way, in that she doesn't really teach with the themes, but at the very end, in her sort of final assessment, and maybe a little bit at the midpoint as well, she really brings up the themes in her penultimate class. She's like, oh, we learned this, this, and this, and that shows this kind of thing. And I think that started us thinking about how, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, it was probably earlier today, that Psych 100 is a little bit like a buffet, right? So you have this piece, and then you go on to this piece, and you move on to this piece, and there's not always a lot of tissue that connects them. And I think Bridget's talk amongst ourselves, and I remember Kristin coming up to me at that APA and being really excited about talking about this and about the AP exam and how they're really interested in these ideas. And we were just talking about how can we integrate content from one point to the next in the course. And maybe by integrating the content, it will make the content that much more memorable while still emphasizing the skills that are involved in each one of those themes.
This notion of themes has been around for a long time.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And I would not try to imply that it sort of came out of it. It's just that sort of kicked off our current thinking.
I think for a lot of youngsters, it absolutely did. But those of us who've been around for a while knew about Wayne Whiten's work in the 1980s.
Now we've just modeled the nature of exchanges that we've had.
Oh, no, this one was way more polite because
this was very polite, but at least it shows, I think.
Well, I think too that, one of our very first meetings as a group, we had collected, not only Bridget's, but also from Whiten and Myers and a lot of different scholars. But when we looked at these scholars then, many have approached and sliced it and diced these themes in different ways. And so we just made a huge listing, right, of all these different themes and started to see where do they kind of cross over, where do we need to add, and so on. And this started to work from that point in terms of what we thought were the most relevant, for us and so on.
Yeah, I think we were inspired by Bridget's big ideas, but we weren't so inspired that we didn't say, well, let's take Bridget's ideas and make them the core document. We said the approach is a good idea. Now let's figure out, as we look across contexts, which ideas will work. And at least for me, the themes are the kinds of things that I want students to be able to converse with me when I run into them years after graduation. I'm not going to expect that they'll know who the father of American psychology was, content point, but I'm hopeful that they will have carried away with them the understanding that their grasp on reality has flaws, and that will have slowed them down a little bit in how they form judgments about people. That I hope is what the true transformative impact will be of themes, is that students will remember some key ideas about what it means to think like a psychologist and engage in that kind of thinking from time to time for the good of themselves and their communities.
First of all, I would agree completely. But secondly, the innovation that I remember from Bridget that I don't remember from Wayne's work is that Bridget built in meaningful assessment into assessing the themes that she uses in her course. And because I geek out on that, and I know Jane does, and I'm pretty sure Jen does too, that's what impressed me about the themes. I would agree, not so much her themes, because I think she models those for her students at Duke and before that at Stanford, which makes perfect sense. But how she married it to assessment, and maybe Wayne did that. I'm just not as familiar.
I don't think so, but I think that was before assessment became the A word that it's become.
Oh, it's an A word. All right. But so I think that was the impressive part that, we wanted to model when we did the other parts of our work, not only student learning outcomes, but assessment work as well.
Well, I remember that talk that Bridget gave, and I remember thinking to myself, this is in this state of thinking about teaching Psych 100 as drowning. But I remember thinking that this is like a lifeline. This is one of those models. This is one of those things that somebody can grab onto and they can find some coherence to build their course around. Now, themes are not the only way to do that. There are other models, and we actually offer those in the book, right? But yeah, it's one of those ways. And I think it's really, really good. So here, before we finish off today, I thought maybe...
I just got here.
I thought maybe we would just talk about the themes themselves. And I won't hold you to knowing them word for word. But for those who want to share, is there one theme that you really liked? Not that it's like better than others or whatever, but one theme that sticks out to you that you think, I either just like the way it came out, or I like it from my particular students. I really value this in the way I teach, and anybody.
Well, selfishly, he said the one I wrote.
Which one? Is that the one that got edited out?
No, it's still in there. It did get edited. Some Yahoo got in there and edited it, but it's almost there. I don't, my
Which
colleagues
one
are
was it?
scanning. I have an F.
Which is what?
Oh, I don't have it in front of me. I just know it's F.
Is it applying psychological principles can change our lives, organizations, and communities in positive ways?
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk to us about
that was my only contribution to this entire group.
That's one of my favorites too, actually.
Well, and I think that one in particular is going to make an impact in Guidelines 3.0 because we've adopted that as the theme for Guidelines 3.0. So there's some nice continuity there.
Sometimes it just has a cascading effect over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, is it the lives, organizations, or communities that stick out to you? Like, because those are three different spheres, or is it?
I didn't write that part. Somebody put that in.
But it's the application.
It's in a positive way. It's the end of it. We can do good with psychological science. It's not just a textbook that sits on the shelf after you've had the class. Go find yourself an IO psychologist to make your workplace better. Go find yourself a therapist to improve yourself.
Yeah.
Go find a developmental psychologist and help your child get better at whatever he or she needs. This is a science that helps people get better and be better, helps organizations get better, helps businesses become smarter, helps the environment heal. I mean, there's so many good things about it. We don't tell our story enough.
Yeah.
We need to be better at that too.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Any other favorites in this list?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, I like all of them. I mean, they were all hard won.
I like all my children equally.
I know it was hard. I mean, to hammer out words, hammer out this. I mean, we went the rounds on just a word. I mean, until we got it right. And so, I mean, the one I think that, and this was I know Sue's not here, but this was one of Sue's suggestions and it's in the last theme about ethical principles guide psychology, research, and practice. Because a lot of times when we talk about ethics, we talk about the research ethics. But this was something that I know I really stood out to me in our conversations with Sue was saying, well, where will our students have contact with psychology and ethics? Not so much in research. Few of our students will be research participants, but many may find themselves in a therapist's office. And I just thought that was so important. And for me as a teacher, it's like I have lots of things in how to teach research ethics. I've got all kinds of things. But this is a challenge now to me as a teacher to find some good resources now to help my students understand ethics in practice, which is something that at the high school level, I'm not sure what happens necessarily, at the other, but it's not something that we've really talked about before. But it's absolutely one of the things that our students are much more likely to encounter than anything else in ethics.
Well, and although I can't say this is necessarily my favorite, because really they're all my favorites, the one that was the most torturous to get done was the one that deals with social justice issues. We had made an original attempt at trying to address interest, appreciation, yada, yada, about diversity matters. And I don't think it was coming together well, but I think ultimately we ended up borrowing the phrasing that we got, I think, from the high school standards.
The national standards, yes. Mm-hmm.
That they really knocked it out of the park in a way that made us go, yeah, that's the way that we want to say this. That's the way that we want to get behind it. We think this suggests some forward momentum that isn't always the case when we're talking about outcome expectations. And ultimately, I think we all came to embrace that with enthusiasm, even though that was a really difficult one to get across the finish line.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I have a theme that I like, but then I also want to be sure that I have time for a quick thank you. So I'll talk about my theme first. And that is theme A, which is that psychological science relies on empirical evidence and adapts as new data develop. The most interesting part of that to me is the adapting as new data develop, and learning styles is always the thing that first comes to my mind, mostly because it's a constant battle at every level. Even last week, I was sending Dan Willingham's papers to colleagues at my institution, and just so that students realize that an answer is never a final answer. There are always different ways to approach a problem that might give you different results. There's always a context to think about that might have provided results in one setting and not in another. And I think there are a lot of those examples throughout psychology. And I think they're important to acknowledge these historical studies that were fundamental at the time, but now maybe looking back or through replication or whatever, maybe we found that was then and this is now, and we have a different understanding, and that 10 or 20 years from now, our understanding might be different again, depending on these areas. So that's the one I really like. And then I do have to run. Unfortunately, I need to get somewhere, but I just want to say thank you to Martha Baynow at APA. And not everyone knows her, but everyone should. She's behind the scenes of every good thing that comes out in psychology education at APA. And so I really just want to thank her for her patience and her encouragement and her gentle guidance along the way. Sue Orsillo came in sort of toward the end, but was a great sounding board. And I really appreciate that as well. So I just wanted to say thank you to Martha.
And we're starting a public
Amen.
campaign right now to get Martha onto the podcast, because she
Awesome.
won't. And
That was my hint.
she won't. Maybe if Jane was on with her, she might. But probably not.
Might.
Probably not.
I think she would be on if Emily was on with her.
Yeah.
That would be a great idea.
Both fantastic.
That would be a wonderful idea.
So start sending emails.
I've talked to Martha about this. Yeah, I think she would be on.
Jen, thank you for your leadership. Kristin, thank you for your leadership. Folks, this is a really important document. I celebrate with you all the woolly mammoths of the IPI, this group who put together such a transformative document for instructors and students for decades and decades to come. And so congratulations.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.